coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
I mean, in the West for a long time, it was pretty much like your parents would absolutely simply veto a bad choice. And if they wouldn't do it, then the extended family would. And I think some of those norms are going to return. And I think they might even return via a new wave of apps. It's not just, these things can do what we tell them. And they're not just here to take our humanity away. And I think some folks might be surprised to see, especially younger Americans, kind of make a hard pivot in using the power of technology to promote orderly ways of living above the kind of like romantic, dreamy sort of spiritualism of the boomers.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast of the American Mind. I'm your host, features editor, Spencer Clavin, and I'm joined today by editor James Poulos, coming back from his travels and from talking to the Publius Fellows, among other things. And we have a new guest today. Her name is Elizabeth Haney, and she is one of our new directors of major gifts here at the Claremont Institute. So we are delighted to have her on the pod and at the Institute. Elizabeth, great to have you. Thanks for joining. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you were a Publius Fellow before you joined us full time, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your background.
Yeah, well, it's great to see you again, Spencer. I know you taught at Publius last year along with James, and I'm happy to be breaking away from corporate finance and back to raising money where it needs to be raised. So I'm very, very happy to be here and be on this podcast today.
Excellent. As many times as we can spread the message that people shouldn't be giving their money to people that hate us, they should be giving it to us, to Claremont. That is so much the better. So very glad you're here. And we've got a full docket, as always, of things to discuss. First and foremost, inflation. This is not the kind of record that you want your administration to be setting when history looks back upon you. But we are hitting another 40-year high. The U.S. Consumer Price Index, which measures the changes in prices for goods and services, rose 9.1% from a year earlier and 1.3% from May. This is data released today as of this recording on Wednesday. You will hear it on Thursday. So, I mean, what to say? The kind of interesting dimension to this, I guess, remains the starkness of it. The fact that people are encountering it at the grocery store, they're unable to lie it or wave it away, hard though they are trying. I mean, Karine Jean-Pierre is out here saying this is the strongest economy we have ever had. And yet, these numbers are not getting better, and they're hurting people. This is like one of those things that you always see the woke left talking about. These policies are hurting people, but these policies are actually hurting people. Our colleague Chris Caldwell had an essay out recently in which he argued that inflation always reflects unspoken priorities on the part of the government. I think that's certainly true in this case. We know that this administration and this Fed is about many things before it's about just helping the American people to get back on their feet. It's about so-called racial equity, which is to say race quotas and racial rearrangement of society forcibly from the top down. It's about LGBTQIA plus nationwide, worldwide propaganda. Any number of these things that have been avowed priorities of fiscal policy and now coming home to roost. I mean, the Ukraine stuff, only the latest, although it is being kind of put forward as if this were the source of it all. But I'm just going to turn this over to you guys. I mean, I'm tempted just to ask, what even remains at this point to be said?
I think that it's really becoming an issue for everybody that billions of dollars are being spent in the Ukraine. And I live, mind you, in the San Francisco Bay Area, the most progressive place in the entire country where all the kooky ideas are being tested. And, recently I was coming down to Claremont and I was in Uber with a clearly lesbian, democratic female. And she was saying, she started up herself, like, look at all these zombies walking around the Tenderloin. Meanwhile, we have people like Biden that are sending billions of dollars to a country that does not even border us. What is going on? This does not seem to make any sense. So I do think that, especially with inflation, which, mind you, only goes back 12 months. So the fact that inflation has been rising is crazy because it adjusts, it goes up every 12 months. It's been crazy. I mean, I think that this is an issue that the left and the right are coming together on and being like, why are we spending so much money overseas to a country that a lot of people didn't even really know about in America a couple of years ago?
Yeah, it does seem that that more people are just accepting this as, I mean, on the one hand, more people are accepting it as a fact of life, but more people seem also to be rejecting it as the fact of life that it has become. There are disagreements, and things are moving quickly. I mean, I saw I think a pretty credible report that the monthly inflation, inflation this month is somewhere adjusted around 17%, maybe pushing 20, and that makes the 9.1 that we talk about look small by comparison. And definitely what's going on is manifestly the result of bad policies, bad priorities. But I do think there's some deeper things going on, and maybe I'm not the expert here. I just float the things that seem reasonable to me, and then we talk about them. So I was having a conversation with a high-ranking Claremont Institute individual who cautioned against the kind of thinking that you sometimes hear, which is, wow, the dollar's being destroyed, we're all going to die. His point was, we are likely to be seeing some deflation coming up. And one reason why there may be apparent complacency concerning the inflation is because the prognosticators and policymakers and regulators are anticipating a significant switch back into deflation. I don't know. I mean, would that it were so simple as being a high-ranking economist or whatever in the government and saying, here are my projections, so everything's going to be fine. It's not going to be fine. People are getting hurt on this end, and they might get hurt on the deflationary end too. But there are some things that inflation can do that have a value when it comes to getting us out of problems that otherwise might be intractable. So like there's a lot of bad debt. And what do you do when you have bad debt that can't be written off? You look at student loan debt. I mean, some people say that it's unpayable. It seems to be something that will not be paid back anytime soon. And so if it's just kind of sitting there and it's being serviced, people are making payments on the interest, but the principal is never going to go away. Congress won't probably do a debt jubilee. They keep kicking the can using sort of executive fiat. So what do you do with this thing, and how do you get past it? Well, one thing that you can do is you can just inflate that stuff away. And I think that that's an example of the upside of inflation and why things have gotten to the point that they have. But I think at the same time that there's a lot of like bad debt out there, there's also a lot of fake wealth or sort of like money that isn't representative of financial strength out there. They really primed the pump coming out of COVID. There's more money in the system, more dollars have been turned loose on the country. I forget exactly what it was, but over a very short recent time frame versus all historical and geological time previous. what happened to that money? A lot of it sort of disappeared. There was that blip that we heard about, COVID emergency funds kind of dissipating, maybe even internationally. That was kind of scary. But a lot of it is probably not in circulation, is sitting in banks. A lot of wealth has been vaporized by the market downturn, by the crypto downturn. And it's reasonable to think that at least, a few people at the Fed are looking for ways to let that fake wealth out of the system in the same way that they're hoping that inflation will take some of this bad debt out of the system. The danger is that it just kind of whipsaws back and forth, and ultimately, no matter how smart people are, they simply lose control of this incredibly unwieldy system. Modern monetary theory has created a way of doing economic business that is really wildly out of human scale. And I think, it's hard to imagine how we wouldn't have to face some sort of reckoning for that.
Well, with student debt, like deflation in the 1920s, there is this expectation now. The reason that people are not paying back their student debt is because they're just paying the interest because they expect that there's some kind of legislation that's going to get passed. It's going to totally erase it. So what I noticed in wealth management is like, oh no, I'm not going to pay that now. They're going to write something to get rid of it anyway. So that's part of it.
Well, and
absolutely,
lower income so people are not the only ones who just don't have the sort of savings that they would need to pay down debt without having to cut into their lifestyle. And when a lot of that lifestyle is sucked up by really high rent in one of the handful of major cities where people feel like they need to live, or whether it's going toward, the kind of weirdly stable luxuries of living in one of those big cities. What's the point of living here if I can't enjoy the $18 Negroni when I go out with my friends, or if I can't get the SoulCycle membership, whatever, or the dog walker. These things that used to be sort of like gratuitous luxuries have kind of become like, if you don't check those boxes, then you're sort of failing at life in these coastal cosmopolitan cities. And yeah, you can unplug and leave, but I think there are still a lot of people who cannot quite so easily just bail on the pod that they live in, and that kind of enclosure. And it's going to be tricky to extricate people from those situations. A lot of folks can actually move and get out, move to a red state, but there are a lot I think you still can't.
Elizabeth, your story about the Uber driver, which is reflective also of some stuff I've been reading, especially in Newsweek lately. They've been publishing a lot of pieces, not only sort of quote unquote about the working class or what have you, but by folks who actually seem to work in some form of manual labor or something that you would think of as blue collar, and they all basically say the same thing, which is we have a range of opinions about some of these kind of arcane, abstruse theory fights that you're having among the good and the great about gender theory and whatnot. But basically, we just want to live in crime-free cities, and we don't want to fear for our lives walking down the street. We want to be able to pay for a sort of decent life, maybe even imagine on one income, we would like to be able to raise some children and have a stay-at-home mom. And these things are we wish that these things were not just insane pipe dreams as they seem to have been in the generation before us. Back then, they seem to have been actual feasible things. And where did that life go? And also, what's the point of my life if it doesn't look like that? And it does occur to me as you guys are talking about this sense, which I've experienced also among the generally pretty well off set, that what's the point of what is student debt? It's just as imaginary as the national debt, right? The national debt doesn't seem to really be a real thing that anybody has any intention of shelling out actual money to resolve. It doesn't seem like these balance sheets bear any relation to what we can and can't pay for, underwrite, and do as a government. And people kind of have in microcosm that same attitude about some of their student debt. It's such a colossal number. They can't fathom what it would mean to pay it back. Nobody, it used to be that when that happened, you just took a little chip out of it every day, but that doesn't seem to work for people either, because as James is saying, like that just goes to more and more interest. And so you do seem to be adding up to this situation in which everybody, and not just the working poor, and not just what, Myron Magnet might have called the underclass, is in the situation that it used to be reserved only for sort of welfare dependents, namely that the government is sort of stringing them along in just livable enough lifestyle for them to be able to say, well, I probably don't have to do anything about this, and I can kind of edge along and get by on this sort of more meager existence. And Magnet and Charles Murray and any number of other people have been like pounding the table forever. This is not a new idea that sort of life, it does not conduce to a kind of aspirational, noble sense of self, or the sort of energy that might inform a national pride, civic pride. So when we look out on the post-COVID landscape and we say like, well, why aren't people going back to work? Like, why do people seem so dejected? Why is pride in the country down? Like, these are not great mysteries. They are consequences of just this crushing sense that, yeah, maybe inflation, maybe we deflate a little bit, maybe we inflate, ever more. But like, what does any of it really mean? I mean, my sense is like less that people have a really robust idea of the problem or desires for how to fix it than that there's just a general kind of listlessness engendered by the seeming intractability of these problems, and just a feeling much like the kind that you get when republics harden into oligarchies, that there's a whole group of people, not in fact lazy, not drug addicted, not mentally ill, but just people trying to get by, that just don't really have a place in the vision of the future that the elites are presenting.
No, let's be honest about it. A lot of people are going to fall into poverty if these inflation rates continue. And they're not just going to not be able to afford the Soul Cycle or, the nails. They're going to have this psychological disillusionment that they're really just falling behind. And one other funny anecdote that the Uber driver said, she's like, the drugs don't even look fun anymore. I mean, they're just walking around in the downtown like zombies. There's nothing fun about this. The fun is gone. This is not looking fun. This is not looking good. This is looking very, very pessimistic. And, she has a point. They're literally zombies, or people that want to be out of this world, or, I mean, it's something else.
And the homeless are not the only zombies. I mean, this is kind of the weirdness that is pervading everything, is whether you are out on the street or whether you are living, in the penthouse pod. Many people are wanting out of our shared lived reality as such, and are more interested in. Think about, it's not just the fentanyl, it's not just the heroin, it's the prescription drugs, it's the mood stabilizers, it's the birth control, it's, a host, it's the Ritalin, it's a lot of different drugs. It's legalized marijuana. I mean, the amount of drugs flowing through the bloodstreams of America, through the brain stems of America, things that rewire your brain in a fundamentally unnatural way. And in many cases, it's not even entirely clear to the scientists, like, well, yeah, I mean, here's a molecule and sort of like dopamine or serotonin or whatever, and these receptors, and we had the money, we threw this at the wall, it kind of stuck. People who felt despondent felt like marginally less despondent in like clinical trials, and so like off we go. And then you add alcohol on top of that, people seem to be drinking less, but it's still there, and it's still sort of like has a cachet that, going out with your friends and sort of like mainlining in a wine bar, like we haven't gotten there yet. But we do seem to be living in a society that is organized around the idea that confronting your everyday life the natural way is not sufficient to making it through life or to living the good life. And that's just something that can't possibly be sustainable, promising a kind of high from which one never need come down, or from which one will never come down. That's not really the way it works.
Well, it's your, sometime mentor and friend, right, Joshua Mitchell, James, that talks about the distinction between supplementism and substitutism, right? Any number of things, like, look, I take pre-workout and then I go to the gym, like that is a performance enhancer at some level. But fundamentally, of course, like it sort of informs a whole person human thing that I'm doing. And there is just a real sense, I think, just throughout all of the phenomena that you're observing, whether they be kind of the fentanyl zombie or the like wandering homeless ghost or the kind of ketamine high that you enjoy in between Tinder dates or whatever. Like all of these things have in common a certain sense that like this is the sum total of being. Like this is the best that we can hope for. And not to like get back on my horse or whatever. But it does strike me that like when John Adams said all of our modern philosophers are Epicureans, like he wasn't kidding. This is a really demeaning and degraded vision of personhood that we've been grappling with in this country since before I was born. Like ever since I was born, there's been this kind of like, oh yeah, you're just a chemistry set inside a meat sack, and isn't it amazing that your like computer, your meat computer, can like pilot your skeleton in this incredibly complex way? Ha 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 ha, lol. Like, but of course, this is people talk about this as if it were some sort of cute infographic or meme, but it's actually the sum total of the wisdom that has been passed down to them by their elders about what a human person is. And so, of course, like at a much deeper level than even the debt, which is kind of a reflection of this whole thing. Like people don't, I don't think, have a sense that like what would they do with themselves as entire people, if not kind of nudge the various chemicals around to achieve maximum pleasure or at least minimum disturbance. That does seem like just the gaping hole at the heart of all this is like, what's the vision of the human person that can sustain life in a world full of machines, as James is always talking about, that like does not reduce us to bags of meat?
Well, there's no shame in it either anymore, and that's the thing. So I'm 28 years old, and I have a lot of female friends, and you'll be hard-pressed to find one of them that is not taking some kind of Prozac. And that's just how it is. Like, you have a problem, you feel bad, you get, you call the feel-good doctor, and you get a prescription. But I think that it does prolong, your maturity, your advancement, having to go through problems on your own. And that is a real problem, and that does make us, in a certain way, softer and unable to really think about what is important and grow.
Well, maybe that observation will give us a chance to touch upon a sort of viral news story that I hope we won't dwell too long on in itself, but that did raise some questions for me. This is this confrontation between Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, and a Berkeley professor, Kiara Bridges. And this is one of these interactions that has now become a kind of regular spectacle in our government, which is the senator interrupted a question or an answer to a question and said, you've referred to, or maybe didn't even interrupt, just said, you've referred to, quote, people with a capacity for pregnancy. I guess this is all about abortion that they were talking over. And he says, would that be women? Would people with a capacity for pregnancy be women? Bridges answers, many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy. They have this whole back and forth, and Bridges eventually ends up, giving him the standard line, denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist is dangerous. Obviously, this has been memed to within an inch of its life. Obviously, it's kind of a stark illustration of, where we stand on questions of metaphysics and human biology. But what strikes me about it is the kind of black pill idea that, like, this is, these are our credentialed young people, right? I mean, this person looks like the kind of cool professor that you might have, up and comer. She's sort of suave behind the mic, and this is like the gospel that they preach. And I just wonder, a la sort of Inez Stepman or Aaron Sabarium, like, to what extent is this ideology really firmly, does it have a firm hold among the sort of 20-something set that that you're describing, Elizabeth? I mean, it used to be that you could say that these people are marginal kooks. Now they've obviously taken a big chunk out of the culture. But what about just regular, like, people in college and just afterward? Are they this bought in generally to kind of trans extremism?
I think, unfortunately, yes. I might be biased, though, because I do live in the Bay Area, but I think that they are, and it is a big issue. But I do think generally, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not craziness and it's not kookiness. It is a very sophisticated and thoroughly worked out theological response to the thing that is driving everyone away from wanting to be real people in real life. We have created technologies that are so powerful and are so capable of simulating everything that we do. Some would even say that they are now becoming capable of simulating the soul or a soul in these machines, that we find ourselves unable to have solved all of the characteristic human problems. And we want out of our humanity. This is the turn that this movement is making and has to make and logically makes. Not that, everyone is a human being and so they need to be respected, but that it is the constraints of our humanity that are the problem. Humanity has been tried. It has been found wanting. It is fundamentally unjust. Josh Mitchell had an essay in The American Mind a while back where, he had this footnote, which was like, well, why stop at humanity? Perhaps it's vertebrates who are the real problem. Like, perhaps, the only form of life that is pure and deserves to go on living is the invertebrate. Where does it stop logically? It doesn't stop. And so the eye is pulled toward liberating the spirit or liberating consciousness and using technology to rid ourselves of the natural order of things and the structure of life and identity that is formed by and rooted in our humanity. There's nowhere to go but there from where we are right now based on that conversation, and that's how it needs to be met. Getting caught up on I certainly don't want to offend anyone. Regardless of sort of where the appropriate threshold for sort of feeling indifferent to people's feelings might be, like, the bigger thing at stake here is this is a high level established sort of religious culture that is responding to the crisis of meaning and the doubt in the goodness of our given humanity.
Well, there's a lot of money behind the trans issue as well. Big Pharma sees every trans kid as, bringing them in some odd $1 million. And the question is, if you look behind the curtain, is money the end goal here? Like, what is the purpose of really pushing the trans agenda onto young people? Is it money? Is it something else?
We live in an oligarchy, so money is going to be very important. But I think, in our oligarchy, the money is great, but the money is a number, and numbers, quantities, math, these things are authoritative with regard to prestige, power, knowledge in our society. And so the tremendous amount of money that Big Pharma generates is seen as proof that what they are doing is spiritually correct, or is kind of like what there is for us to do now.
Right. This does seem to me, it seems as if the money both supremely is and supremely is not the point. If James's analysis is correct, and I see no reason to question it really, then what you are dealing with is a highly abstruse but very identifiable theology, right? You're dealing with a certain set of claims about, what life is, what God is, or what the highest good is, and like all sort of heresies or distortions of religious truth, it is ultimately going to boil down to worshiping certain crude things of the world, mostly having to do with power, right? I mean, you do read some of the actual transhumanist manifestos, and I find them really interesting. You know, you read like Nick Bostrom, say, at Oxford, and it's really interesting to me that this is a person who understands himself to be a highly virtuous, to be an ethical person, to be a humane person, even to use an ironic word, that, you know, wants the best for these things, these beings that we are. And you read Bostrom list the things that, you know, enhancements will do for us when, in fact, we do merge with the machines. And they're, you know, goods in themselves, long life, right? Strength, intelligence, things that we would like. But you can like control F in his oeuvre forever and never find like mentions of things like virtue and, you know, moral good. And often, in fact, these conversations about, well, should we become transhuman are, you know, expressly exclude like moral questions from view because it's just going to happen, or else, you know, this is going to be, it's self-evidently good that we should become, you know, as strong and as fast and as smart as possible, no matter what the expense. So I feel like there are certainly people who stand to gain from installing this faith as the, you know, new established religion, the kind of the faith that America plunks on to move forward as a nation into the digital age. And of course, how could they not measure that strength by money? Because if you don't have an actual transcendent, if you don't have a God that creates us, like what's the measure of man if not like money and strength? I mean, these sorts of things are very old and atavistic and go back to like Socrates arguing with Thrasymachus. And yet at the same time, right, like James is certainly right that the answer to it is not, well, you can make more money this other way, which is kind of what conservatives tend, I think, to do, especially if a certain like ex-Reaganite stripe is like, well, like it'll be more efficient if instead we just adopt free market practices. And that's probably not the answer, right? Instead, the answer is, well, there's a long and rich tradition of, you know, what it means to be a rational animal. And actually, that's a better thing to be than like a kind of orb of pulsating light that spits out answers to computer-generated questions. But, you know, perhaps we won't hit upon exactly that theology on this podcast. We should talk a little bit about this Biden executive order, because I actually would love for you guys to help me to understand. I think it's an interesting sign of what the administration's strategy will be, what the Democrat strategy will be as they start to go forward in the post-Dobbs world. We talked last week a little bit about the kind of 10-year-old pregnant rape victim who was cited on, I think, CNN at Kristi Noem as somebody that, you know, this person couldn't get an abortion in Ohio. It seems like there is now some corroboration for that story, that person, that 10-year-old does in fact exist. So far as we can tell, it's unclear to me why they couldn't get the abortion under Ohio's law, but it's really neither here nor there. It's only to say that's one prong of the fight, right? Is this idea that you're killing, you know, some supposedly untold number of women who are going to be in these terrible positions. And we've discussed at length that, you know, this is a small minority of abortions, but it seems as if this other, you know, the other move here is to somehow install Roe into federal law. The Democrats are talking about it in Congress, and Biden is signing an executive order. It's called an executive order protecting access to reproductive health care services. And it builds on the actions his administration, I'm reading from the White House here, builds on the actions his administration has already taken to defend reproductive rights by safeguarding access to reproductive health care services, including abortion and contraception, protecting the privacy of patients and their access to accurate information, promoting the safety and security of patients, providers, and clinics, and coordinating the implementation of federal efforts to protect reproductive rights and access to health care. Even over and above the notion, the, to me, kind of ghoulish notion of installing Roe as a law, or God forbid, even as a constitutional amendment, even on top of that, it strikes me that this is kind of unremarked one of the most naked and authoritarian exercises of the imperial presidential power to date. Am I missing something? I mean, is Biden just sort of seeing, like, daring the courts to strike him down as he basically declares that actually Dobbs didn't happen?
Well, you know, I think that it's quite early in this process, and I think that the tremendous capability of the internet to surface the most outlandish or triggering or polarizing event of the moment is going to create a hard road for Americans who are already, pretty fragile in their mental state. Spending all day on the internet, that can have certain effects on you, just sort of like physiologically. But really, it's like, if you peek under the hood of the internet, what you immediately get is sort of like the most triggering or disturbing or shocking or polarizing or scary or weird, or it's just a very intense experience. And you really have to like go out of your way to hide yourself from the news if you want to spend a lot of time on the internet and not be kind of driven to distraction. So, I think we're already seeing with like the fallout from Dobbs, like these, extremely, extremely borderline marginal cases being surfaced, and then the debate becomes about that. And this is a kind of extremism that doesn't have to do necessarily with any kind of set of beliefs. It's sort of like an extremism of experience and the centering of, very, 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 very unlikely and obscure things. I mean, I think we've seen this with, what people seem to be insisting on calling trans stuff, which is, the movement of a tiny fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the population that feels compelled to engage in a kind of, communion with technology of a certain kind. And it becomes a collective obsession. And this is happening with, this story of the 10-year-old girl who got the abortion or whatever. And there's no sign that any of this would stop. I mean, how do you stop this fire hose? I think, you move away from the fire hose instead of trying to turn off the fire hose, probably. But this is, we're just going to have to find a way to get through this. And in the meanwhile, when you look at the legislatures that are actually going to be making these decisions, I saw some blowback on Twitter from the left. Biden's proposals don't actually do anything. This is less than the bare minimum that's needed. So it's going to be a challenge, and I think the pressure is going to just continue to push this issue downward, down to the state and local levels, because we do seem to be headed toward a point where on a number of issues, no matter what comes out of the very top, no matter what comes out of the federal level, it's just going to be sort of picked apart and despised and devoured before it has a chance to breathe.
I don't know if you both heard, but after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Emmanuel Macron put into the French Constitution abortion rights forever. So, Biden might be taking a tip from him.
Well, it is interesting the ways in which, wasn't Buttigieg up in Canada right around the time that Trudeau was bringing down the hammer on those truckers? That our progressive left has been taking cues from sort of European neo-autocrats for many, many decades now. That's sort of their stock in trade. And in fact, they'll tell you, well, really what we need to do is we need to be more like insert sort of a quasi-socialist country from Europe here, like Sweden or Germany or whatever. And yeah, I do think that this has haunted me since that EPA decision from the Supreme Court, right? That Elena Kagan is out here just full on going the full Wilson, just out here saying your elected legislature is too stupid to make laws on your behalf, and you're too stupid to pick the ones that aren't too stupid. So they obviously need to outsource the very job of running the country to people who know better, people that we like. And that is what does sort of strike me about, this federal move here, even as I am myself kind of starting to wonder whether this is an issue that ultimately, be it 10, 20, 30 years down the line, is going to need a nationwide answer to the question one way or another, is that a human being in the womb or not? Even as I say that, there's obviously ways to go about that are legitimate under the American Constitution, and just sort of declaring from on high that medical abortion is going to be legal everywhere does not seem like like one of them. Protect access to medication. Abortion is one of the prongs of this. But, James is bringing up another important point, which is like, we can hyperventilate about the overreach of the presidency and the decay of our tripartite system as much as we want, and there's plenty of that going around. But really, the truer black pill, or maybe it's a clear pill, is like this stuff is these institutions have so hemorrhaged public trust already that ultimately, whatever is sort of proclaimed from the lectern, at least at this White House, it's sort of like the debt. It's like people are going to be like, well, I'll wait and see like what happens in the court, essentially, and then we just get thrown back again on like, get out in November, vote for people that like you think are going to represent your interests, and play these things out on the local level. Which maybe that's more of a clear pill. I don't know. It certainly seems like a better option than just like, well, now Biden's going to make this decision for us.
People are going to have to actually re-enter real life, though, in order for this to work. I mean, when you do get down to that lower level, the internet can do many things, and technology can do many things, and there are even some things that you can do through the internet that you cannot do walking around, looking around, and meeting your fellow neighbor. But these things are not substitutes for encountering your neighbor and having a real life in concert with them, not just because it's good for your soul or you have some kind of ethical obligation to like interact with people who you pass by in the street. Although it is shocking, even to me, I feel like a real old man now that like I walk down the street and sort of like make the eye contact that goes like, I'm here to say hi to you or good morning. And the person just like blank stares and just blows by you. Men, women, young, old, like people are really sort of checking out of like the basic sort of like acknowledgments of one another's existence. And no wonder if they have their ear pods in, and sometimes they're not even looking at their phone. Oftentimes they are. You have to be able to interact with people and not feel like you're undergoing some sort of alien experiment in order to hold up your end of the bargain. If the bargain is like, okay, maybe the feds are just going to kind of have to back away from a lot of this stuff, and so responsibility is going to devolve back down to perhaps where it should have been to begin with. People are going to then need to take up those responsibilities, and they're going to need to find ways to encounter their neighbors and engage in some elementary, life of politics, political life with folks. We all know that like town council meetings can be awful, or like, you sit with the board of supervisors and your eyes roll into the back of your head or whatever. These things are going to need to be refreshed in some way, but you can't just like, well, we'll outsource it to the machines, or well, we'll evolve to a level where everyone's like so, improved that we don't really need politics. You're always going to need politics if you're going to be a human being, and that's going to involve probably for a lot of people some, this is how it is with kids who, I've talked to younger guys who are like, I used to grind so hard on World of Warcraft, and then like a voice said to me, like, if only I grind that hard in the gym, like maybe I would become like awesome and incredibly strong and good looking. And maybe people will start having that experience with political life where it's like, wow, the number one type of game on the metaverse is a farm simulator. Like people maybe, I don't know, like how many days of farm simulation you have to go through before you're like, what if I did this in real life? Maybe that would be even more satisfying. And maybe you'll have that experience with local politics too.
But that would require them to stay. That would require them to stay in one place. I feel that the people are very transient today, and you can't be involved in politics unless you've been in place and plan to be there for a good amount of time.
Yeah, it's hard. It's especially hard when at the same time you see these stats that are like, most Americans still live within 10 miles of their mother. And it's like, wow, are we really getting like the worst of both worlds? Like stagnant and transient at the same time. Like, gosh. I mean, if we can get
Well,
this much wrong, then it seems like, you know, we could just like tweak things a little bit and suddenly like get those things. You know, how do you go from like the worst of both worlds to the best of both worlds? It might be that the missing ingredient is both more simple and, you know, demands more responsibility than people think.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I promise that I'm not trying to shoehorn this in, but James, I am so excited for you to read my book. I feel like there is like as I was writing this book, which is sort of about the deeper currents of our various malaises, it did strike me, and probably because you are such an influence on me, James, like I did find myself often just thrown back on, like, yeah, you're just gonna have to like unglue your eyeballs and brain from the from the pixels that they've been fused to, and like recalibrate your emotional life to respond to what's actually happening around you, rather than to the sort of like simulacrum that you have cast up in front of your head that represents, quote, the world. And yeah, living in real life is how to make that something that is rewarding again is kind of the great question. I wonder whether one dimension of this that we haven't really talked about yet is like sex and relationships and family, because I just finished reading this like long piece in the New Yorker that kind of went viral about like the ethical dating app, where everybody is like 5 different kinds of queer, and most of them are in thruples, and like, you know, you can drink orange wine together and then have sort of anonymous sex. And yeah, like I don't know, when I read these things, or when I read like, you know, Christine Emba's Rethinking Sex, and she describes the lives of 20-somethings seeking love in New York or Chicago, like there opens up in my sort of imaginary, empathetic world, there opens up this like enormous chasm just of kind of bleakness and despair. And like, from what Ember writes, that is not a fantasy of mine. That's actually what this is like. This sort of just totally deracinated, sort of like you were talking about, Elizabeth, this sense that I don't really live in any physical space, and I'm going to move away pretty soon. And so I can't really put down any roots anyway. Just the soul-sucking nature of that. It can't endure forever, can it? I mean, you would think that eventually people would say, actually, you know, what I would like is just to, you know, be ethically monogamous. How about that? Or like to find somebody that will actually treat me like a human being rather than like a bag of neurons. And these things I do hear rumblings of these sorts of things in the earth, even from people that would not identify with us politically at all. I hear people saying like, you know, this really does not serve me. Like it didn't really even serve the free love hippies back in the 60s and 70s, but it totally does not serve me now, when sort of all the luster has gone off it, the blush is off the rose, and all we're left with is just this sort of wandering listlessness of sex that isn't even fun, just like our drugs aren't even fun. And I wonder whether like that enticement is one of the strongest for people to get back into something that looks like healthy real life. Is like, you know, you could actually be having like a relationally rich sex life and relationship life, where you connected with people in physical space and like saw them more than once and lived in the same town as them for more than 5 years. And like, I don't know, there's got to be a draw there, no?
I think there's a chicken and the egg problem, though, because as people, as James is saying, are meeting less in real life, I think the apps kind of commoditize humanity. They commoditize the individual. And there's a new study actually that came out that said that people that meet on dating apps are 6 times more likely to divorce. And so now, you know, the stats are out. You know, it's not a really great way of meeting people. Not to mention that if you meet someone in real life, you have this kind of social obligation to be nice to them. You have to treat them like a human, because if you don't, your friends are going to yell at you like, hey, like I set this up. This is my friend too. What's going on here? You know, as someone you meet online, there's no social obligation there. So yes, I mean, I think that the stats are out. This is not a good way of meeting people. It's not organic. And people are going to have to be comfortable again with, you know, meeting in real life if they don't want to have a depressed romantic existence.
Yeah, there might be still weirder things to come, such as romance no longer being the center of people's life plans. And not just in a destructive way, but in a, like, you know, the result of the failure of the dating apps to deliver on the kind of romantic promise is, I think, leading especially folks who are vaguely on the right to say, like, well, how about robots that arrange my marriage? You know, like, time is short and I want to start a family and I still want to be young when I have a family, and it's hard to meet the right person. And, you know, how about I just like submit my dossier to an app that then matches me with like an actual pool of people who, you know, I don't know, maybe I don't need to fall head over heels in love. I just need to like get on with the business of living like a healthy life with someone who's going to stick around and that I can like prevent the culture from sliding into the sea with, even if at a very small level. I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, I mean, for some, you know, Indian folks, like, this is like, welcome to our world. You know, you trust your parents to set you up, and then, you know, the love will follow. And you just, if you have like the solid foundation and you're on the same page culturally, then, like, you know, you really have to be like a real jerk to screw it up. There are examples of this happening outside of India. I mean, in the West for a long time, it was pretty much like your parents would absolutely simply veto a bad choice. And if they wouldn't do it, then the extended family would. And I think some of those norms are going to return. And I think they might even return via a new wave of apps. It's not just, you know, these things can do what we tell them, and they're not just here to take our humanity away. And I think some folks might be surprised to see, especially younger Americans, kind of make a hard pivot in using the power of technology to promote orderly ways of living above the kind of like romantic, dreamy sort of spiritualism of the boomers.
Well, in the time that remains, we just wanted to touch on one other thing, which is that there is a new Hunter Biden leak. It just seems that this stuff keeps coming. This is, of course, the infamous story of the famous laptop that was broken by the New York Post, but then the Post was kicked off of Twitter, and the story itself was suppressed on all the big platforms. And then just kind of casually, more than a year later, the New York Times mentions that actually it seems like there is quite a bit of interesting stuff on this laptop regarding Hunter's connections to Burisma and the Chinese sort of state-backed company that was doing business with him and them. Now it looks as if we are being treated to, I mean, Elizabeth, I think you mentioned that you might have seen some more of this than I did. I was treated to a video of Hunter in a kind of like sensory deprivation chamber. Very difficult to describe, but drinking a White Claw, smoking a something, and listening to like Enya knockoffs, all incredibly bizarre, but also kind of sordid in its way. Am I getting this right? Did you see more of this than I did? And what else do we learn from the latest Hunter Biden leak?
Before I realized what it was, I saw this whole video of him arguing with a woman about the amount of crack that he should buy, and it was not looking good. It was not looking good. But yeah, he was in some kind of dark place and arguing with, you know, crack on a scale. So there we are.
And federal prostitution charges possibly now in our future. There's also been, I guess we should not leave out the dimension that there seem to be some suggestions that Google is censoring Hunter-related results, or was on Monday when this story was breaking. So it all just strikes me as like, you know, it certainly strikes me as a something burger, but will anything come of it, or is this just kind of how our oligarchy looks now?
I don't know. I mean, I think that we are once again being treated to a peek behind the curtain, you know? Like, it's not just the way that it seemed where, oh, children of the rich and successful, you know, they're just so desensitized to like the normal niceness of life. they become nihilistic, and this is like the world of Bret Easton Ellis, where it's just sort of like this moral void for the kids of these incredibly privileged sort of type A, shallow, once again, boomers. That was just the time at which this happened. And the adults were shocked by the nihilism of the kids. They don't believe in anything. They don't care about anything. They don't care about themselves. You're tan, but you're not happy. Like what's going wrong? What am I doing wrong? This to me reflects like extended exposure beginning at a very young age to raw power and to the distortions of the soul that are inevitable if you are exposed to that degree of power for that long. I mean, imagine it, like you are the son of someone who has been at or near the top echelon of American politics for your entire life, basically. You are sent to the frontiers of the empire to do business in one of the shadiest and most corrupt areas in the world that's not going to guarantee to get you killed. What do you expect? Hunter Biden is behaving this way not because he's like, oh, he has mental problems, or he's super privileged, or he's really bored. Like, he's swimming in very dark waters, and he was sent to swim in very dark waters, and you cannot swim in those waters without that stuff seeping through your skin and into your soul. And there's a reason why so many people at high levels seem to be corrupt and depraved, and it's because of the nature of those high levels. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is an idea that's been around for a long time. People, seem to be strangely resistant to it, probably because they think, well, but I should have more power, and that can't be wrong. And that's understandable. But, I think, just as with Epstein, we're being treated to a look at what there is what's left to do at that level and what has to be done at that level. In order to keep the wheels of the machinery greased. The grease that has to be applied is a pretty grotesque and viscous material.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But I can't help but notice that the media is very soft on Biden, and he's not really asked to speak for Hunter the way previous presidents have been asked to speak for their children when they have disgusting mishaps. So that's definitely a change.
You can imagine what the news would be doing if this were a Trump child. I mean, it would be unrelenting.
Yeah, it'd be a huge smear campaign, and I don't see the same.
No, I mean, you have to go digging even for the footage. Or you can just open Instagram, I guess, which is something I try to do as infrequently as possible, even though it's often forced upon me. But I think... Gosh, when you describe Hunter Biden that way, James, it sort of sounds not unlike some of the conversations we were having earlier on at the beginning of the show, that what do you do if not only do you have no higher vision of yourself or humanity than like a chemistry set inside a meat sack, but also you have exhausted, you have traveled the four corners of the world and seen all things and known all things, and lo, all is vanity. Lo and behold, this is you can have everything and nothing satisfies. There does, what struck me about the clip that I saw was a kind of dead-eyed look, sort of the combination of obviously very high-end quote unquote wellness treatment with empty stares, sort of fish-like stare into the void. It's horrifying. I mean, it's like one hesitates to say it, but but for the grace of God, at a spiritual level, one kind of recoils from it, even if it might be infuriating and it's contemptible and all these things. To imagine yourself in that position is almost more awful than anything. It's when movie stars get everything they want, and then it turns out that what they wanted wasn't actually affirming or fulfilling. This is like that on steroids and whatever else.
Yeah, we forget about it now because, everyone has a Ukraine flag, but Ukraine was a very corrupt country. It was a very dark place to be working. And
If only somebody had tried to find out about that, like maybe on a phone call, say, with a head of state or a member of the government. Like if only there had been somebody trying to get to the bottom of that. But no, that would be crazy.
Totally crazy.
Yeah, never mind that. We would have to impeach that person. Well, all right, folks. We are out of time. This has been lots of fun. It's great to have you on, Elizabeth. Thanks for being here. And, James, you're okay too. And thanks to all of you who are also okay. And thanks for listening to the Roundtable. If you like our show, please visit our websites at AmericanMind.org, Claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. You can donate to support the show at claremont.org/donate. Don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star review. If you like this show, dang it, give us a 5-star. It very much helps, and we do appreciate it. Plus, it makes our hearts sing, or at least keep your bad opinions to yourself. Although I will say that I have a secret dark pleasure, which is scrolling through the 1-star reviews, which you do occasionally get, and it's usually libs losing their minds. And I have to say that I love to see it. But please don't add to that, because otherwise you will crush us in the algorithm. All right. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.